And so it is my great pleasure, to not only welcome each and every one of you, but to once again welcome Professor Iqbal from Interfaith Miami. And now up here with us is Rabbi Rachel Greengrass from Temple Beth Am. And so what we want to do today is a little different than regular Sundays. Look around, it's a little different. But there was a beautiful prayer that Rabbi Barbara sent to me, that I was really inspired by. And it had a couple of themes in it. And the themes were help us, or speaking to God, help us, guide us, strengthen us, forgive us, and remind us. And so what we're going to do is just share from our own faith traditions a little bit about some of those particular themes as we all come together to recognize that there is power in us coming together, power in us having a vision of what is possible, and leaning on that which unites us, which is the very presence of God itself. And so we'll get started, and Rachel will get us going.
All right, thank you. Yeah. It's wonderful to be here with all of you, with our communities all together. So I wanted to start with help us. I'll read the full prayer, but it starts with help us to uphold the values that are so central to who we are, human beings created b'tselem Elohim, which means in the image of God. Before I start what I had prepared, I just want to say for our Jewish brothers and sisters in this space, a Melbourne synagogue was set on fire on Friday night, another act of arson and terrorism against our people. And one of the things that has been so hard for us is this is our core belief. This is the first thing we are taught as Jews, is that humanity is created b'tselem Elohim. And so it is hard for us when that is not reflected back to us, that we are treated as somehow less than human. In Bereshit, when creation is described, which is Genesis, so those of your church will know this well as well. God said, let us make humankind in our image after our likeness. And God created humankind in the divine image, b'tselem Elohim. Male and female, God created them. So this means a lot of things to us. The first is this idea of creativity. That just as God created, so too us who are made in God's image are creative. And just as God created our world through the power of words, we too create our world through the power of our words. One of the things that we work on so much in our community is called Lashon Hara, the evil tongue. It is so important how we say things, how we describe things, how we label things. So how can we be loving in our creative acts? How can we be thoughtful and purposeful with our words? And how can we be stewards to God's creation? The second idea of b'tselem Elohim is this idea that all are a reflection of God's image. There's a story shortly after the story of Noah, which many of us know, right, where God flooded the earth and started over again, called the Tower of Babel, where the people all come together speaking one language and having one purpose, which is to build a tower to heaven. And it is 7 short lines, but it is a very dense story where God sees what we're doing, is so upset that God spreads us everywhere, confounding our language, which is where we get the term babbling. Our rabbis wonder, what is it that we did that was so long? And just one of them, Nachmanides, I want to share with you, who says if we think that there is one way to reach God, then we don't have freedom. And we are, in fact, committing idolatry. The spreading of the people throughout the world, he says, is actually giving us different religions and faiths and ways to connect and talk to God. And if we think we have the whole truth, then we are making of our own faith idolatry. In this as well, this idea of reflecting God's image, we also remember this beautiful prism that we are. I come from a science background. One of my favorite things is white light, right? Reflects to create an entire rainbow. So when you're a kid and you're coloring with your crayons, you think if I put all of the colors together, it turns like this brownish, blackish color, right? But in fact, when all of us come together, we are light. We are this beautiful, beautiful heaven-sent ray of light. So we want to respect, when we say B'Tselem Elohim, all of that diversity, whereas I may be purple and you may be aquamarine. Like, we are all important, and together we create a path to heaven. And it's only in our diversity that we are not committing idolatry. The third is B'Tselem Elohim is a reflection of love. It says in Pirkei Avot, which is the beginning of the Talmud, which is our oral Torah in Judaism. So beloved is man, since God created man in the image of God. But even more beloved is man, because God told us that we are created in God's image. So when we say B'Tselem Elohim, we should feel God's loving embrace. God was lonely, and God created us. How beautiful is that? Every day, God gives us a new day. This day is a gift for us, so let us live it and be grateful for it and not squander that beautiful gift. The last two ideas of B'Tselem Elohim I really want to focus on with our group today, because the first is really that it's a statement of responsibility. If I am the living image of God, how do I need to conduct my life? How can I walk through this world so that I am honoring the stamp that was put upon me? We have two texts that I want to share. One is from the Talmud. I know that there is a similar hadith, which is that God created us from one human, Adam, to teach us many things, but the first one is that if you destroy a single life, it's as if you destroyed an entire world. And if you save a life, it is if you saved a world, right? If something had happened to Adam, none of us would be here. Rabbi Akiva asks in the Talmud, what is the most important line of Talmud? And answers it himself. Like, that's what our rabbis love to do, ask ourselves a question we already have an answer for. And he says, love your neighbor as yourself is the most important line. But Ben Azai corrects him and says, no, these are the generations of Adam is the most important line of Torah. So for those of us who read, Bible, which is a lot of people in this room, that's kind of a boring line, right? These are the generations, but what does it mean? It means we're family, right? That I'm not going to treat you with respect because you're my neighbor. I'm going to treat you with respect because we're family. So that brings us to the second challenge of being created, B'Tselem Elohim, is seeing every person as a reflection of the divine. Not just the people in my house of worship, not just the people who vote the way I do, not just the people who fit into my mold, who are my neighbors, right, who are more like me, but the people who challenge me the most, the people who I view as strange, whatever that means. How can I love them? And so the most important aspect of being created, B'Tselem Elohim, is to be God's hands here on earth. If we are created in God's image, that means that we should walk after God. Our rabbis actually debate, what does this mean? You can't walk after God. I want to read this text from the Mishnah Torah, which was written by Maimonides. He said, our sages taught the following explanation of this mitzvah. Just as God is called gracious, you shall be gracious. Just as God is merciful, you shall be merciful. Just as God is holy, you shall be holy. In a simple manner, the prophets called God by other titles: slow to anger, abundant in kindness, righteous, just, perfect, almighty, powerful, and the like. So this is our job, to try and be all of these things. You know, Jews, we are 0.2% of the world population. And so we're often the only Jew that someone knows or encounters. So we feel this acutely, that we are conduits through which people understand what it means to be a Jew. So how is what I'm doing reflecting on my people and on what we believe about God? But for all of us, as religious affiliation declines, it's important for all of us to be ambassadors of our faith. And is what I'm doing a positive reflection of my faith? Is it a positive reflection of what it means to believe in a higher power? And one of those beautiful filters is B'Tselem Elohim. Am I acting as though I am created in God's image, and that those who encounter me are given the dignity of being treated as though they are created in God's image? And so this prayer, help us. Help us to uphold the values that are so central to whom we are, human beings created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Help us to recognize that the inherent dignity of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. The inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family are the foundations of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. May we find the strength to protect and plead the cause of the stranger among us, to ensure just treatment of all who dwell in our land. And can we say amen?
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
There was a reason you were guided. Yes.
Thank you very much for those beautiful words, Rabbi, and for Reverend Juan for welcoming us all here today. It's a great blessing to be joined by all of you. I just wanted to say actually a few words. The section that I was given was the idea of strengthen us, and I think that that's an important thought. One of the things that's important within the Islamic tradition is the belief of the straight path, that we are on the path to God, and that a lot of times we tend to veer away or off of that because we're distracted in life. And one of the challenges I think that the Quran teaches us also is that we should be grounded in God. So when things are going well, a lot of times we think, well, we accomplished this, we did it. And when things are going really badly, it's really, that's the time that we think about God and we're asking God for help and sort of guidance. So there's a very powerful Sufi tradition that says, this too shall pass. So whether it's good times or it's bad times, everything ultimately is one with God. And that's something that helps us, that's important for us to remember. But one of the things that we see in our society, in America and other parts of the world, as we become disconnected from our communities and communities' faith and from our families, particularly in the times of holiday, is the issue of despair. And I think that one of the things that's important for us is to never give up hope that God is there, and that ultimately, whatever the challenges that we have in life, that there is something that is greater than us that would help and sustain us. So one of the things that the Quran teaches us is the prophets have always to maintain courage, striving in the way of God amongst different types of people, even if they are tempted to despair, as Abraham doubted that the birth of his son would come to pass, right? So Abraham was old, Sarah was old. Abraham didn't think that that was going to happen, and ultimately that is something that did happen. That was a miracle. Joseph tells Benjamin not to lose heart at the actions of his brothers. God instructs Noah to rise above rejection and build the ark. And also the prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his enemies, that ultimately he would be sort of victorious. So I think this idea of despair is something that is part of the human condition, part of the frailty of humanity, but that we are strengthened in terms of our hope by the people that are around us. So that's something that I think is really quite powerful about the Unity mission, is the idea of the community and how each of us strengthens each other. How each of us strengthen each other in terms of our faith. So we are always here to remind each other that there is hope, that there is faith, and not to despair in terms of taking moral courage. And I think that's the second part of it as well, that sometimes we're asked to compromise our values in the way of power, in the way of money, in the way of attaining social status, and having hope that in belief that there is something that's greater that guides our lives, and also in the hope of an afterlife as well. That's important, that even though things might not go well in this life, or there might be decisions in the short term that would put us at a disadvantage, ultimately in the Islamic tradition there's a belief in the divine balance, in the mizan. Everything balances out in the end, and ultimately it balances in the way of God. And so to have hope in that divine power, that ultimately all of the challenges that we have in life, there's always an ultimate justice that comes out of that. And to have that guiding us in terms of making the right decisions in what we do. And one of the things that I work with the Jain community, which is a small religious community that developed in India about 2,500 years ago. And one of the things that's really beautiful about the Jain community and the Jain religion is the idea that every single thing that we do has an impact. So when you talk to a Jain person, a nun or a monk, they have to cover their face in order to not inhale an insect. When Jain monks walk, what they do is that they generally sweep the space in front of them as not to kill an animal, right? So there's this idea that what we think, what we do, what we say, all of these things have an impact on our soul, and it's a day-to-day mission. And that's something that we see even in the writings of the Fillmores, right? Of the Unity tradition, that they brought this and they connected with the Bhagavad Gita. They connected with the Indic traditions, and those are very powerful sentiments. So with that, I wanted to just to reiterate that message of hope. To have hope in the power and the love of God of us, and to strengthen us to do the right thing, even if it's not the most popular thing. Thank you.
Thank you both. Well, Iqbal mentioned the Fillmores. So for those of you who may not be familiar, we are a different flavor of Christianity here at Unity, right? And so you may even be seated with members of Unity here, and some of them may call themselves Christian. Some of them may call themselves spiritual. I like to refer to us as a mystical and metaphysical approach to Christianity. And in that, what that invites us into is to recognize our oneness. And that when we do harm, or when we keep ourselves from stopping harm being done unto others, we're really harming ourselves. Because if we are one, if we are extensions of the same God, and therefore one expression of the divine, whatever hurts one hurts us. And whatever we don't do to support people from keeping themselves from being hurt or feeling not seen, whenever we don't take responsibility for that, what we're really doing is we are just adding to our own sense of separation. If I feel myself separate from anybody that's around me, it just adds to me feeling separate from God. And so bringing unity, bringing harmony, bringing peace to each other is a form of coming once again to recognize and remember that we've always been a part of God and that there is a divine plan in us expressing that divinity out in the world. So let me just begin by saying, Rabbi Rachel, I didn't know about what took place at that synagogue, and I know I speak for all of us here at Unity in just not only expressing our love and our appreciation for the strength of the Jewish community and so many people that face discrimination, and we are here to continue to build the bridges that remind us of our oneness and our unity. And so to all of you here, you have friends and you have a heart here at Unity on the Bay for each of you and for the ways in which you hurt or are harmed. So know that. So actually, the themes that I wanted to touch on were forgive us and remind us. And forgive us is actually because I recognize the power in forgiveness. And while I don't have the whole stanza of the prayer, part of it actually says, grant us, is it? Kapara, atonement for the misdeeds of exclusion we invariably commit against the most vulnerable members of society, the unwanted, the unhoused, the uninsured, and the undocumented. Atonement is something that in Unity we see in maybe a different way, and the way that we break up that word is at one meant. And so atonement is just recognizing that we are one, to know that what harms others is harming ourselves. That when we, for example, on Sundays, will end with a namaste, which in Unity it means the Christ within me or the divine within me salutes the divine in you. It has to be more than just words. It has to be followed by action. Our fifth Unity principle says that it's not enough to know that there is only one presence and one power that we call God. That it's not enough to know that we are expressions of that divinity. The fifth Unity principle says we have to act like we know. We have to act like we believe it. And so we're really called to be the extensions of that peace and love that we want to see. At the earlier service, I mentioned it's one thing to imagine peace. It's another whole thing to actually work towards it. And here, we're invited to work towards it. Here, we're invited to not only forgive each other by simply recognizing that we are one, but then forgive ourselves for the ways in which we may not have acted out of that understanding so that we can remember that we are one with God. Anything that keeps us separate from somebody else is just adding to us thinking that we're separate from God, the source of our good. And so for me, it's really important to ask ourselves, and I invite all of us, who have we been excluding from our hearts? Right? Like, who are we not welcoming? And I know, here in this prayer is like the unwanted, the unhoused, the uninsured, and the undocumented. We're pretty progressive communities here, right? So we connect with that. And like you mentioned earlier, are we keeping those that don't welcome the unwanted, the unhoused, the uninsured, and the undocumented from our hearts? And how can we open ourselves? I love that Unity is named Unity because it looks to bring together people. And it brings together different traditions, different ways of thinking. And by the way, because we're so progressive, that sometimes doesn't feel that good, and I myself am uncomfortable with that. And we get invited to be uncomfortable and be okay with that, because that's where the work begins. I quote Neil Donald Walsh quite often, which says that life begins at the end of our comfort zone. And so we are living in uncomfortable times. We are in uncomfortable relationships individually and collectively. And this is where life really begins. This is where we are invited to live out who we are and what we want to remember ourselves in being. And so I do want to close with remind us, because it really is about that, remembering that we are one, remembering that we are here to be extensions of God's love and God's peace. And God brought peace and love to the darkest of places. And so it's not about, finding the most lit room and showing up as our light. It's in really recognizing that there are some dark spaces where people have forgotten their truth. People have forgotten the unity. People have forgotten how we were made in the same image and likeness, and be that light. In those places where there is darkness, we've been created as light to bring it. In those places where there is disharmony, we have been created with everything we need to bring about peace and union to those around us. And through that, remember the peace and union that connects us with the divine. To me, it's really about remembering that we've been equipped for this time. It is uncomfortable. There are things that are taking place. I was mentioning to Rabbi Rachel, unity in the past, and the idea of being positive out in the world sometimes would not look or want to look at the places that didn't feel good or where there was harm. And now we're at a place in our own evolution and in our own maturation where, no, that is the reality that people are living into. That is the reality that people are experiencing, and it doesn't have to be that way. And we are equipped to make it a different way of being, and really metaphysically understanding that heaven is not something that happens after death, but that heaven happens when we really own life and everything that is a part of our experience and everything that is looking to be shared by us. And so with that, I'm so grateful that we're here, that we're having the conversation, that we're inviting each other to be in closer connection, and that we're inviting ourselves to be okay with being uncomfortable with some of the things that are going on in our lives and in the collective human experience, because we were made to be the answer to that calling. And so I just invite all of you to know that, to affirm that, and to trust in that. And when each of us forgets, because we do forget, when we ask God to remind us, God sent us, each and every one of us, to be by our side so that when I forget, you remind me. When you forget, I remind you, and we do that in unity. And so I just want to close this off by speaking the words from the closing of that prayer, which says, "May it be your will, and may it be ours." Let us all say, Amen. So thank you to Rabbi Rachel. Thank you to Professor Iqbal. And we're going to have